So in late February of this past year, I flew to Mexico City with a friend, and we took the bus 2 hours south, where a taxi picked us up and drove us for another 45 minutes to Mecheros, which was a small village with a population of about 400 people, where our B&B was. The next morning, we woke up early to get in cars driven by our tour guides, and we drove for another 2 hours into the mountains of Michoacan, where we met our horses. And the horses took us high into the mountains, into the forests of the Oyamel fir trees. And as we walked deeper into the forest, I started seeing them. First one, and then another, and then 2 or 3 flying together, and then the sky was full of them, monarch butterflies. India, will you show our slide? Michoacan is a region in Mexico where monarch butterflies overwinter. And deep in the forest and high up in the mountains, somehow, the conditions are perfect for hibernation. And somehow each year the monarchs know to go there. There are literally millions of monarchs hanging from the trees, and they hang in clusters off the Oyamel fir trees. They're folded up black and orange wings, making the evergreen branches of these conifers look brown. Will you show the next picture? And there are so many butterflies, each of them weighing only about half a gram, that the branches of these giant fir trees will sometimes snap from the weight of all those butterflies. And when that happens, tens of thousands of butterflies take flight at once, filling the air with the sound of flapping wings. It is, in a word, magical. Can you show the next slide, India? Now, I have long loved butterflies, my mother will tell you, but this particular part of my journey of butterfly fascination started at a farmer's market in 2019. I was on the way home here, and I stopped in Dedham at the farmer's market, and I found a milkweed plant. I had just started planting a pollinator garden, and I noticed a teeny tiny gray insect on one of the leaves, and on closer inspection, I said to the farmer, "Is that a monarch caterpillar?" And she enthusiastically replied that it was. And so that summer, I began raising monarchs with my then 2-year-old housemate, Micah. And we just finished our 4th season of raising them on the back porch. You can advance the slide, India. Thank you. It all feels like magic to me. This paradox where the more of the science I learn, the more in awe I am. And though the science of it is a sermon for another time, I will just say I love the transformation, the chrysalis, the beauty of each newly emerged butterfly. But I am particularly in awe of what they do after I release them. You see, I have been raising what is called 4th-generation monarchs. And each year there are 4 generations of these butterflies, 3 of the generations living only 4 to 6 weeks. And the 4th generation, the super generation, lives for about 8 months, and they travel over 2,500 miles. It is the most highly evolved migration of any known species of their kind, and science has not been able to answer. How do they know to go to these forests every 4th generation? And how do they find these specific clusters of trees so deep in the mountains? I sometimes wonder if perhaps I have leaned into my monarch enthusiasm so hard over these past few years because this world feels like it's on fire all of the time. And I feel like I need beauty and wonder and magic wherever I can find it. Because these past few years have been so hard, have they not? It has been a hard time to be a human in the world when it sometimes feels like things are worse than they've ever been. A few days ago, the board of this congregation, along with your ministers, had our annual retreat where we take a step back from the month-to-month running of this congregation and we take a bigger picture look at our work for the year. And we did an exercise at our board retreat where we listed what we were noticing about the cultural context right now. And there was so much. Rising inflation, increasing wealth inequality, resignation, families struggling with reliable childcare, deep political polarization, rising fascism, chipping away at human rights, more depression and anxiety, fear, isolation, the list went on. Overall, it did not feel like a particularly hopeful exercise. And not to mention COVID, which continues to be so hard on so many people, and on congregations. Congregations across the country and across denominations are feeling this. There are tough questions facing religious communities right now, including ours. Questions like, who is coming back? How do we adapt to the changes that COVID has brought? Where are the volunteers? You've heard me asking this for faith formation, no? How important is church when our routines have shifted over these past few years? How much do I personally want to engage? And what energy do we have after these long years? And frankly, after these past 2.5 years, I am exhausted. And I know many of you are too. And building community, investing and engaging in congregational life, it takes energy. Energy that I know many of us wonder if we have anymore. And it feels easier, perhaps, to not practice what I preach. I see the temptation in finding spirituality on my own, in hiking, in meditation, in raising monarch butterflies. The questions facing religious community are feeling so hard today, these days, and the energy costs so high. And sometimes I wonder if maybe the monarchs on my back porch all by myself could be enough. So I want to take you back to Mexico, to my last day there. Over our 3 days, we visited 3 different monarch sanctuaries. And on the last day, we were scheduled to go to the busiest, most popular one. And I was sure it was going to be the least good experience. Touristy, commercialized, I was very doubtful. But I had come to Mexico to see the butterflies, so off I went. And on the 3rd day, it was a familiar routine. Get on the horse, ride for an hour, chat with the tour guides, chat with the other people on the tour, see the butterflies, get on the horse. But this time at the top of the mountain, there were so many people, like throngs of people, way more people than I had been around since COVID began. And I was disappointed, to say the least. I was second-guessing the extra money I chose to pay for the tour that day, and I was thinking this was not going to be nearly as special, not nearly as magical as the first 2 days, which had both been in more secluded and remote areas. And there were all these staff when we got to the top of the site. They were all wearing matching shirts, holding signs on tall poles reminding us to keep silence. And I tried to get as far away from the crowds as I could. While still getting a decent view, everywhere was roped off, but I went left when most people were going right, and I found a little spot right up at the edge of the barrier rope. And I sat down in the dirt, and I took some pictures, but mostly I just looked. Contemplating, watching a butterfly with tattered wings, shredded really, land and take off right in front of me, wondering at how it could still fly with those shredded wings that had taken it so many miles. And I thought, don't we all have tattered wings after living in this world? And aren't we all also beautiful? I sat there for probably 20 minutes until our tour guide tapped me on the shoulder and told me that it was time to go. And I realized that as I had been sitting in silence right at the front of the roped-off area, the crowd behind me had filled in. And I turned around to see a huge crowd of strangers who had been sitting and standing in silence behind me this whole time, watching this mysterious natural phenomenon with utter reverence. And as I walked back to the horse, I thought, wow, I have just been to church. Because in that moment in Michoacan, I had this feeling that I've only ever had in religious community, a feeling that this world is far too beautiful and far too broken to witness it alone. And all those butterflies and all those people had migrated to these inaccessible forests in the mountains, and something beautiful had happened. Not just the monarchs, sure, but the witnessing also. The sense that all together, all those monarchs clinging to the branches, all those people from all over the world standing in silent reverence, all together parts. How does that happen? How does the math on that work? Again, it feels like magic to me. In my own spiritual life, the times that I have most felt in awe, most connected to something bigger than myself, when it seems like the whole is so much greater than the sum of its parts, these times are the closest that I have been able to putting words to God. And it's not a feeling I have had almost ever by myself. But I have had this feeling singing in community, around dinner tables or around fires, when the group hits the harmonies just right. I've had this feeling here in this congregation, watching our congregation support Janet Snyder and her children last year as she was dying of cancer. I've had this feeling witnessing people coming out in this congregation and being held and supported by this congregation. I've had this feeling watching coming-of-age youth whose orientation for the new year is today, had this feeling watching them share their credos and wondering at how they've grown and changed over the years that I've known them. I've had this feeling at potlucks and in worship, at board meetings and on the playground. Maybe for you, you've had this feeling in New Orleans or through our Partakers program, or maybe teaching our faith small groups, or maybe you are still seeking. That moment when you look around and realize this is all so much more beautiful together than any of the pieces on their own. In our board retreat this past week, after we listed all of the somewhat depressing trends, we shifted to a conversation about why this church, matters in 2022. And your leaders, friends, you have amazing leaders on your board, really amazing leaders. Your leaders gave beautiful and heartfelt answers reflecting ideas like, I find comfort in having community where I can go when I feel stressed or hopeless. We are trying to live out the kind of values that the world at large needs. Someone said, I always leave feeling more grounded and lighter. We look after each other, we care for one another, from toddlers to elderly folks in our community. Someone said it makes the needs of the world feel more manageable, like I can have an impact here and this church can have an impact on the wider world. It gives me new perspective. It's an alternative to the often negative mainstream messages, norms, and values. Do these reflect some of why you come to church? Why you were drawn to this place the first time you walked in, or why you kept coming back? Friends, we know that it matters that we engage in community, yet especially after these long COVID years, we feel isolated or exhausted, or maybe we've forgotten the why of it all. But we also know deep down that we need other people to help us witness and make meaning of this tattered and beautiful world. We need other people who will help care for us. We need a sense of purpose and hope in a world that can sometimes offer too little of both. We need a sense of belonging, of being part of something larger than ourselves, a sense that it all adds up to something greater than the sum of its parts. And we need to remember that even in the brokenness, this world still has magic in it, and that the most powerful magic is the one that we create together each and every day. Thank you for creating that magic with me. May it be so, and amen.